My name is Soren, and I think I just created a whole new way of visualizing and creating color palettes in 3D, and it turns out it's surprisingly useful. I've been working on this for a couple of weeks now, and it's for my multiplayer art program Saket Studio. In the last episode I showed the pixel art editor I made. If you ever tried pixel art yourself, you would know that picking your colors is one of the most essential things you can do to make your art stand out. Pick the wrong colors and your art is doomed from the beginning. You can go wrong in so many places. You can ruin an art piece by making it too saturated or too dark. And hue shifting is especially important for pixel art. Cure on Pixel Joint created a really good tutorial explaining this, so if you want to learn more about color theory in pixel art, I put a link to their tutorial below. In conclusion, choosing colors that work together is hard. Originally, color choice was restricted by the hardware. Old hardware, like the Commodore 64 or the ZX Spectrum, would only support a handful of colors. Along with other special restrictions, this meant that artists had to get really creative. Nowadays, you obviously aren't restricted by the same hardware, and in modern software you often find 3 sliders to change color: red, green and blue. These go from 0 to 255, so in total you have over 16 million colors to choose from. This freedom only makes it harder to choose. And that's where palettes come in. A palette is simply a collection of colors. You can choose to use the same colors that old hardware forced upon you, or you can use a palette that another artist has created. By using a palette, you ensure consistency and visual appeal. And that's why palettes are still so widely used today, especially in pixel art drawing. Back to my program. What you're seeing here are the colors of a palette mapped out in 3D. The idea for this 3D view came to mind when I realized that the colors are in these 3 dimensions, the red, green and blue mentioned before. So I created some function to map the colors in your palette to a 3D space. And here you go. Each dimension is mapped to RGB and the corners are a combination of those, resulting in cyan, yellow and magenta. Furthermore, there are other ways of representing colors. You've probably also heard about hue, saturation, lightness, or HSL for short. HSL is a more intuitive way for artists to represent and visualize colors. Instead of mixing colors manually with red, green and blue to create the hue you want, you have a dedicated hue slider. This is a huge advantage. You can also map HSL to 3D, and it comes out in a very interesting way. Instead of a cube, it becomes a diamond shape. When you go around the diamond, you change the hue. The more outwards you go, the more saturated the color becomes, and the higher you go, the lighter it becomes. These 2 color spaces are useful in their own right. They're both part of the new palette editor in Saket Studio, which means it's integrated with the rest of the program and also multiplayer. You can edit palettes together by simply opening a session so other people can join. Now let that sink in. This whole thing turned out to be way more useful than I initially realized. Not only for creating palettes, but also for picking and comparing them. When I opened up the first palette, I could immediately see the relationship between the colors more clearly. Look at how the blues hue shift towards the purple when becoming darker in this, for example. This made me think about palettes in a completely different way. Instead of colors as their own individual elements, I started seeing the palette as a whole, and as lines going from dark to light. Another interesting thing to watch is how the color moves through each color space when changing hue. Now, I'm no wizard picking colors myself. I usually use the site lospec.com. Lospec is short for low specification, and it's a place for everything pixel, voxel and low poly art. And they have a whole section just for user uploaded palettes. Each palette is created by an artist and has an example picture. When you find a palette you like, you can simply click the download button and you have a bunch of format options to download it to your specific drawing program. But what's that top button? I realized that Lospec has an API, so I immediately set to work implementing the API in Saket Studio, because it would make importing palettes so much easier. After some work, I made it so you can import palettes directly into Saket Studio from Lospec. It's actually quite fun to play around with, so to demonstrate the palette editor I'm going to import a couple of palettes and we can have a look at them together. Time for palette analysis. The first palette we're going to have a look at is Menacing Sky by Cactus Celery. By simply pressing the Open in App button, the color palette gets downloaded by Saket Studio. You can immediately edit it or view it. The first thing that pops out is that the palette is very dark. You can observe that by looking at the HSL view, because all the colors are below the circle. That means that they're below half lightness. Also, it's very desaturated, and you can see that by looking at the colors at how close they are to the center. Thirdly, because all the colors are very close together, it's a clear indication that the palette has very low contrast. All of these features contribute to a dark and gloomy palette. This makes sense, because the palette was made for the Halloween event on Lospec. So let's stick to that theme and try the palette out. The palette is very restricted, so it was hard to find the right hues. It's heavily leaning towards the reds, so that's all I had to work with. But I think in the end the colors worked well for this little drawing. The second palette we're going to have a look at is Endeska 64, by the artist of the same name. As the name suggests, this palette has 64 colors, a lot more than the previous. The first thing I noticed are the hue shifting lines from dark to light. I especially like the green, that hue shifts from blue to green to yellow. Additionally, you can see there's a line of natural grays in the center. Interestingly, in this one there are saturated outliers, like the red, pink, cyan and purple. A palette with 64 colors gives you much more freedom because of the wider color space. So I drew a little colorful island. It kind of reminds me of King Kai's planet from Dragon Ball. And the wide color space and saturated colors make this palette very good for a cartoonish style. Looking back at the previous palette example, if I were to make a change, I would merge the browns and reds, because they're so close to each other, and possibly replace it with some yellows. Analysis like this is mostly possible because of the insights the 3D view presents. Hopefully this gives you an understanding into how powerful a 3D view actually is for editing and evaluating color palettes. That's all I wanted to show for this update. In the next update I'm going to be working on a large graph feature I have planned. I want to connect the palette and the drawing in an intuitive way, so when you change colors in the palette, the image will also change in real time. That will be a pretty substantial update, so it's probably gonna take a while. With all of the new features, I just uploaded Alpha 3 to my Ko-Fi. If you want to support the project, consider becoming a member on Ko-Fi. As a supporter, you can always access the newest alpha version. I'll leave you with a question. What do you think about the 3D palette representation? Would you want a 3D view in your art program? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, see you next time.